Not my best stage mom entrance, but it's fine. So I want to say again, thank you to everyone who's listening. Y'all, we're just going to dive in. We had a few pre-submitted questions from some of you amazing Salesforce admins. If you do have additional questions, we are going to open them up. You can always DM me if you have a question. We'd love to bring you up on the stage and connect with these amazing leaders. What you can also do is in the event, you can drop in the comments any particular questions. If we don't get to all of your questions today, spoiler alert, we never do because an hour flies by really, really fast. We want to continue the conversation in the event thread. So feel free. But again, if you want to ask a question, you can either raise your hand. We'll probably start taking questions about 40 after or about 30, depending on where the conversation goes. But with that said, I want to dive in, y'all. And this is something we're seeing a lot, right? We know that admins are working on common delivery pipelines, and it's also an investment in collaboration and governance. This is what gives you all amazing admins more reason to talk to development teams and ensure that you can build together with speed and delivery. And yet, we're still seeing a lot of continued silos and synergy between admins and developers, which is the main conversation topic today. I'm curious for you all, why do you think we're still continuing to see silos? And I'm wondering, what are some of your recommendations to help admins, developers, and everyone on your team move to a more true DevOps culture? And I know that was a very long-winded question, but I am still going to start with my Jen.
All right, so I'm Jen, just so that you can hear my voice. So I think some of it may be from lack of trust between the admin and developer. I know when there is that trust and that great collaboration between the admin and developer working together, I've really seen those circumstances be successful partnerships and not these silos that you mentioned. So back in the day before the pandemic, when people were co-located, that collaboration was tighter. But with regular check-ins, like virtual check-ins, or even doing things async with folks, I think that works well as well in the place of co-location. So prior to Salesforce, I worked at a large financial services firm, and I was part of the governance team, so the Center of Excellence. And we established the org's guiding principles for implementation and determined which types of solutions would require our review. So we would schedule these weekly design reviews and as-built reviews for each org or business unit. And then the team got together and then they presented business requirements and solutions. And you also, we invited folks who worked in our different orgs to attend as well so that they could learn from others. So we would have, great discussions on alternative, more sustainable, maintainable solutions if there were any from what was being proposed. So that was really good to just have people together virtually in a room, collaborating with one another. And I think that just helps in terms of that strong partnership between the admin and developer.
I like that. And I think that a lot of leaders, are really having to lean more into, asynchronous, collaboration and accountability. I'm curious for you, Brian, like what have you seen kind of be effective, echoing a little bit off of Jen, now that so many people are working more asynchronously, what are some tangible ways that we can kind of break down some of these silos?
Yeah, well, first off, thank Tristan for having me. Great to be on with Pallavi and Jen and see so many folks on the line and a lot of familiar faces. So hi, everyone. So I would say I worked kind of similar to Jen's story of a company that she used to work at. I had a client that I worked with, and historically, the admin team was very much in a role of doing kind of quick enhancements. I don't want to say like help desk tickets, but short kind of tactical fixes and enhancements. That was sort of their mode of working in sort of the way that they looked at the world. And the dev team worked more on projects, worked in bigger teams. So the two groups, the admin group and the dev group, just had very different ways of working and very different ways of looking at the world. The dev group used sort of more complex DevOps tools. They used GitHub, they used VS Code. The admin group used change sets. So very different sort of ways of working and ways of looking at the world. And what we ended up doing with them is we tried to bring them together and allow each side to see how the other one worked and create a process that worked for everybody. Create tools that everyone was comfortable with, give people the flexibility to use the tools that they want, but also have an understanding of how everyone uses their tools and have an overall process and understand the different types of work they do, whether it's projects or whether it's short enhancements or whether it's sort of platform upgrades, whatever it may be. Understand the different types of work that different people can, make sure everybody's on the same page with how different things are worked to kind of get people out of their silos. So I think that's a really good way to start, because a lot of times, historically, admin teams and dev teams may have come up from sort of different paths, so have different areas of familiarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot about Dominica de Grandes. It's one of my favorite books, and I tell everyone to read it, Making Work Visible. And she says, if you can't see your work, how can you manage it, right? And so when we're talking about working asynchronously, how can we also make the work that we're doing more visible, the tools that we're using and how we're using them more visible between our admin and devs? And I really like that. I'm curious for you, Pallavi, what have you seen, as a CEO and founder and having worked for 18 years now in, this space? I'm curious for you, what have you seen as some effective ways to kind of break down silos between admins and developers?
I think it's communication, right? And the willingness to learn. I started as a BA tester, and as I would find bugs, I could just very well hand them over to my development team. But I was very curious on how to try to resolve them myself if possible, right? So I had that eagerness to learn, and they had the willingness to teach. So we cross-taught each other, cross-trained each other in those departments. And really that helped me understand the developer's mindset and then eventually the architect's mindset. And I think it's also putting others in the admin shoes of really understanding what are they trying to look for, what are they doing, which makes us as a collective more successful. So to have those conversations of why do you need this question, or why are you doing it this way? I always go back to the why. Asking a lot of whys really helps uncover a lot of knowledge and information that I think then in general makes you be successful as an individual on that team, but also successful as a collective on that team.
I love that. And I think that's something, I was talking with one of my Salesforce developer friends recently, and we're talking a little bit more about asking the why, and we're having a conversation. He was like, why are administrators going rogue and building these solutions that are maintenance heavy and they're slowing project delivery? And it got me thinking about, this topic in general. And I'm curious for you all, thinking a little bit more about the whys. I'm curious, in an effort to not build such maintenance heavy, solutions, what are some of the technical questions that, Salesforce administrators just coming up in their, career, what are some questions they should be asking their development teams? I'm going to start with Jen.
As she unclicks on button.
She is a professional.
Little things. Some of the questions that I would think to ask developers, as you think about building out solutions, really think about the general use of it and building things and components that could be reused over and over again. So you're building it once, maintaining it once, testing it once, deploying it once. So some of the questions I think of is, what tech debt are you incurring by building it this way, right? A lot of times there's so many different ways that you can build something in Salesforce, right? There's some that are better than others. And a lot of times people are like, okay, build me this thing quick, right? But sometimes building it quick incurs that tech debt because you're building it for the small specific use case. And then something else comes along and it's similar to that, but not exactly. So now you're building something similar, right? And then you end up maintaining these things that are very similar. So sometimes it's worth that time taking a step back and saying, okay, what are the possible different ways that I could use this piece in making it more generalized, because when you build a solution and it's a monster solution, you want to think about chunking it out into smaller, more manageable components. And when you're thinking about solutions, think about the pros and cons of each solution when there are multiple. And if there are solutions where developers or whatever is like, oh, okay, I could do this in code and I can code it in 5 minutes, but is that the right way to go about it? Are there things that admins can maintain and do versus a developer? Or maybe a developer can create a little Apex action or component that the admin can use, and then the developer can focus on more advanced, complex coding things. So, and also think about what skill set is needed to maintain the thing that you build.
I like that a lot. I'm gonna pass it over also to Brian.
Yeah, so Jen, agree with everything that you just said. I love that idea of when you're laying out options for how to solution something. A lot of times we'll do like a side by side of like, here's the two options for how to address a problem, how to solution something. Jen, to your point, really important when you do those side by side to have a line for what's the maintenance cost on these things. A lot of times people are only focused on what features do we get out of it? How long will it take to build? But thinking about how it will be maintained, what the cost of maintaining it is really important to think about up front. I'd say one other thing to throw into the mix is one thing that an admin can do that I find is really valuable is, particularly when working with a dev team, a lot of times a dev team is kind of unfortunately insulated from the business a little bit. Like they don't have as much business context as they really deserve to have or they should have. And what an admin can do, or a BA or somebody who's closer to the business can start to throw out scenarios that might not be in scope for the version that they're working on, but things that could happen down the road. So if we're thinking about an opportunity and we're building, these 7 opportunity stages or these 5 opportunity stages, well, we don't need it now, but in the future, if we needed to add a stage, remove a stage, if we needed to add a business unit, if we needed to add a division, how would that impact the solution that the team's building? And just kind of think about that. You don't need to go into like deep analysis on it, but use that as a thought exercise, because people, what always happens is people will say, 6 months down the road, well, we never knew there'd be another business unit. Well, it's like, it was somewhat predictable that the business changes and they, add a new product line, add a new business unit. And it's just worth kind of going through that exercise during the project to have everybody on the team think through what would need to happen in order to scale in those various business scenarios. Can I just add one more thing too, kind of on the premise of the question? Yeah. The premise of the question kind of says like, hey, administrators should check in with developers to make sure the administrator's solutions aren't maintenance heavy. I'd say like admins, devs, architects, like we're all sort of guilty in our own ways of bringing maintenance heavy solutions to bear. So I'd say no one is without guilt on that front. Jen mentioned, developers who, prefer code over declarative solutions. I think we've all got our sort of anti-patterns that we fall into there. So I'd say we're all sort of guilty of maintenance heavy solutions at one point or another.
I like that. And one of the things I know from my experience working with a lot of developers and QA leaders has been, thinking about how can we factor that in whenever we're, at the end of a sprint, how can we start to work towards more blameless postmortems, right? And I think that's a great checklist to add to it. Like, what were some of these maintenance heavy solutions that were built? What can we do to address these moving forward? I'm curious, Pallavi, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I feel like Jen and Brian said a lot of what I was going to say, but, just elevating that more is really having those utopic conversations, because we do end up building those solutions sometimes in a short term and short-sightedness, that because we didn't ask the right questions of like, what is the long-term game? If we know that, our solutions that we design tend to be actually more robust, whether they're declarative or not, depending on what the solution needs are, but they're built in a way that they are long lasting versus what we would refer to sometimes as bandwidth solutions.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think, and just for anyone who's listening right now, I saw a few DMs. We're going to try and bring you all up a little bit after. Jenny, and I'd love to hear from you as well. But I want to make sure that we get to a few more of the pre-submitted questions. And, one of them that came about from my conversation with one of my friends who's a dev too is thinking a little bit more that, he was talking, developers, they appreciate that you test in your sandbox before coming to them. But sometimes we can overload people with too much context, and it can kind of bury the prioritization of the request you're making as an admin. I'm curious for y'all in your experience, like how much context is enough context to ensure delivery items are, delivered and needed?
You mean in terms of like getting the right information?
Correct.
I'm very vocal about this topic.
Well, and for you, right, it's like more context. You give a lot of context. Like how much is too much?
I think it's I always use that analogy of like the little kid who asks why. So I was on the phone with I was FaceTiming with my 3-year-old niece the other day, and she kept asking me why, and I kept answering the why. And at one point she stopped asking why. And at that point I knew I had given her sufficient information for her to stop asking me why. And that is when when you feel like, okay, now I fully understand, there is nothing else I can ask a why on. That's when I feel you have the sufficient information. And some of those things are not trained. Like it takes time and practice sometimes to get there, because for example, we were running a design session yesterday with a customer, and we had them, we're revamping their service cloud. And we were like, okay, let's go into your case management. Like, let's pull up a case. Let's look through the fields and layouts that you have. And they were like, we want to keep this field, this field, this field. I want to keep no changes. I was like, okay. Now, I could have stopped right there and said, okay, sounds good. Let's move on. But instead I asked the whys. Why do we want to keep this field? What is it being used for? What do the values mean? And out of that, we uncovered that one of the data inputs that they have is actually very subjective, and they don't really use it. They use it once in a blue moon because someone in some department once a year or twice a year asks for that information. So they have this required data input for every case that comes through for that one-time scenario. And because I asked the whys and the whys and the whys, and not the how, because they started answering how they select and make the subjective decisions and the values. It's like, I'm not asking the how, I'm asking the why. And then they realized, well, yeah, I don't really know. And then I was like, okay, well, how often? And why are they requesting this information? And they're like, well, we don't really know. And I'm like, then is it significant enough? And they're like, actually, it's not. So they came to that realization by me asking the why. But I've been doing this for a while, so I knew not to just take their answer at face value of like, yes, let's keep these and the data points are fine. I still dug in and asked the whys.
I love that so much. And I'm always questioning leaders. I'm like, how much is too much context? I like the part asking the why until it's no longer there. I'm curious for you, Jen, working with your teams and also having been a Salesforce customer before you started working at Salesforce, how much is enough context in your perspective?
So I totally agree with Pallavi, and really getting down to the heart of why things are the way that they are. For me, when I get requirements, I like being part of those discovery and requirement discussions. And I know it's costly to have the developers sit there, but it's important to get that context, to hear about the pain points, right? Before you get just a list of bullets, right? You don't know what's behind those requirements. So while it's costly, I think because you're paying for that resource to sit in the room, the output is ultimately better because that developer has a better understanding of what is needed to then go and build it.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that one, Brian?
No, I think Jen and Pallavi hit it all.
I love it. And I am seeing a few DMs, y'all, and we're going to get to you and bring you up on a stage in just a little bit. And I can't wait for you to talk with these.
Can I just say something that Jen just, that is so important, right? Is that piece that you just said, Jen, about having developers in the room, right? I want to make sure that that doesn't get glanced over or missed by our audience.
Mhm.
When we run our design sessions, we have our architects in that room. And it is not wasted time, money, or anything from a customer standpoint or a Kander standpoint, because they need to keep listening to that why and the reasoning, so then they can solution the right way. When you're just getting a paper document that's very one-dimensional, doesn't have all that context behind the user pain points and things like that, because you're just getting information that I need this for this, so I can do this, right? It's very flat versus sitting in those sessions and then reading, I need this, so I can do this, so it helps me with this. There's a lot more context. So I encourage everybody out there who are on those teams that are doing the build to also have the, like, not have just silo. This goes back to your first question of silos, right? We should not be having silos. BAs should not be just going into design sessions and pulling requirements and then just handing them off to the development team. It should be a collaborative effort. The architect, the technical lead should be in those calls just as well as the BA and the functional lead or whoever. It is a collaborative effort.
I really like that. I always see that. What's that? That post on Twitter, and they have like the fake calendar invite, and they have like how much every single meeting would cost the organization. But what I never see on those Twitter posts is how much those meetings are benefiting customers, right? I'm curious, Brian, you've been in the consulting field as well for a while too. I'm curious if you've ever walked into, you know, a new project, spoiler alert, I'm sure you have, where the team was completely not aligned, right? And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about if there were any technical solutions and or procedures that you put in place during your consulting that helped benefit. I'm just thinking out loud right now for those leaders right now that are like, you know, stepping into a new leadership role, they're trying to get teams together, or that consultant that is, you know, coming onto a new project, and you both are like solid veterans in this field. So I'm curious, like, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about one of those challenges and kind of what you implemented to help them, you know, deliver on time.
Sure, yeah. And one thing too, I'd add to what Pallavi just said, you know, as consultants, we oftentimes will get some pushback from clients or stakeholders around, you know, discovery or analysis, or we're going to bring, you know, the developers into the meeting. And I'd say that helps us to understand the problem. But the other message that I like to bring is it also helps us to solve the problem faster. I think there's this misconception that this is going to slow down. If we do analysis and if we understand the problem up front, it's going to slow things down. It actually is going to help us to understand the problem. It's going to help us to focus. It's going to help everyone to prioritize. And we'll be able to very narrowly address the problem that we're trying to address. And I think that's a message that we as consultants and as admins and developers really should be saying more about discovery and analysis. It helps us go faster. I think that's something that in the past I had sort of been afraid to say, because I'd be afraid that stakeholders would expect we'd be like rushing around and going with haste. But I think it really helps us to be much more effective and faster in our delivery.
I appreciate that.
Tristan, I didn't answer your question and I forgot what your question was. Do you mind?
Yeah, that's
You got
yeah, I was thinking a little bit more, you know, because I think a lot of times everyone is out there, you know, saying, oh my gosh, you know, we delivered these amazing features, we deliver stuff on time. But oftentimes we have a lot of leaders that are stepping into kind of a team that is in disarray, or you're a consultant stepping on to deliver a project. And again, the team is not aligned. So I'm curious if you had a past story where you did step into that situation, and kind of what were some of the technical solutions and procedures that you implemented as a consultant to help the team, you know, be more aligned and deliver on time.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, you know, in terms of in terms of the things that we deliver,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that we deliver in terms of DevOps processes, making sure everyone's aligned with their role in the process and how things work. And those are important, and those are, really important deliverables that we bring to bear on this stuff. But I'd say as a lot of us know, as we all know, like these process issues, these technology issues, a lot of times they come down to organizational issues. And I think one of the biggest things that we try to do when we're working with teams that are struggling to perform together is really to help people to have respect for what other people are doing, and just have respect for other people as people. I think there's, unfortunately, just in general, not in the Salesforce space, I think we have a tendency to put people in categories, and I think we have a tendency to say, like, this position is higher than that position. And I think, particularly with this topic, like the biggest thing that I would say is, like, there is no like higher or lower. There is no like this position is higher than this other one. Architects are higher than admins. Devs are more specialized than admins. Like, we all have a role to play in any of these roles that we're talking about. Like, they're a full career in and of themselves. You can be a system admin for your whole career. There's no need to move on to try to do something else. You can be an architect if you want to for your whole career. There's no need to think you need to go to the next thing. You should do what you want to do, and you should have respect for what you do. You should have respect for what other people do. And I think once teams get into that mindset, it's like you see a lot of the challenges that teams run into. You see those go away, and you see people start collaborating more. So that's what I would say.
But and I appreciate that, but I also do feel like as an industry, right, we do create these hierarchies, right, about people, and we sit on like we put certain roles up, right, and it's not just in terms of compensation, it's in terms of visibility in the organization, right, and so I think that we're all a little bit to blame for that. I remember, having worked for test automation solution vendors for years and years, and we always prioritized, developers in the conversation. And absolutely, we definitely should, make sure they have a voice. But I always tell them, there was one organization, and 84% of every closed deal that we had, 84% had a dev in the conversation, but it was the QA that had organized it, created all the information, the processes and alignments, and did the discovery beforehand. So I always tell these organizations, don't create hierarchies in your own, right? It just doesn't breed for good quality. I'm curious for you, Pallavi, thinking a little bit more about coming onto a project, right? And seeing a team completely disaligned, echoing some of what Brian has shared. I'm curious if there's any other insights, you could give to teams to be a little bit more effective and collaborative, and or if there's any war stories you've experienced before where you implemented a new procedure to help them.
Oh, we don't have enough time for those stories. One of the things we do is, even coming into the client teams, we do a kickoff where we invite everybody. So like we're about to start with a new customer next week, and the CEO, the COO, and the operations team will all be on that kickoff together, because we want to make sure everyone has buy-in and everyone has a seat at the table to voice their needs. We're building systems not for one individual or one team. We're building a system for an organization. So that's one place where we're really trying to make sure everybody is coming through and everyone's opinion matters. And that's kind of what we try to do in our design sessions, is really take time to let everyone voice their opinions and no backlash and things like that, and have that commitment. On our Kander side of things, same thing, right? We are one collaborative team. We're wearing different hats at multiple times. We're supporting, because our goal at the end of the day is to build a solution that is scalable, upgradable, sustainable, and usable from a long-term perspective that aligns to the business mission and goals, but is also, one of the keywords I said in there, usable, right? We want to make sure we're building something that our customers actually want to use and sustain for a long time. So it's all around. And in that regard, if you just have very candid conversations, the hierarchy kind of disappears on its own.
I love that. I love that. And y'all, I know there's a few raised hands. I promise I'm going to pull you up in a second. I have one more pre-submitted question before we go live with some of y'all. And it's so good to see so many familiar faces. Shout out to Arlen. I see you, friend. And we also have Vanessa Grant in the house, which is so exciting. And I see Janine here too. But I kind of want to flip gears a little bit too, right? Because we are talking about people, procedures, but we're also talking about and celebrating the technology that helps enable people to deliver amazing results. And um, we have with us, Jen, who I cannot wait to see live at the upcoming event that we will not name because I know that you're deep in planning.
Don't lose it.
No words, we're not saying it. But I'm curious, thinking a little bit more about the upcoming Winter 24, and all the amazing, awesome admin features that are going to be rolled out. I'm curious for you, Jen, like, which ones are you the most excited about, and you think will help improve some of the synergy, between admins and their dev teams?
So we all know that automation is my passion. So I'm excited about the ongoing automation enhancements and how admins can continue to do more and more with Flow. And where there's gaps, you have your developer friend create those Apex actions for you where you can use it. And then again, free up that developer to focus on true code development. So a lot of the cool things going into this upcoming releases on screen flows and being reactive. So you don't have to build, 5 screens to do what you can do on one screen is great. And then we also have custom error messages in record triggered flows. So similar to being able to show an error message in code, you can now do it in Flow. So very excited for that.
And I know that people online, when that got announced, were like, Twitter was a storm with excitement. I love that. Brett, I'm curious for you too, Fred, like, what are some of the features that you're excited about and you think are going to help with some of the synergy?
So the first thing I need to say is I just figured out, I am new to this LinkedIn format and I just figured out how to like people's comments. So I just want everyone to know, up until 5 minutes ago, I liked a lot of comments. I just didn't know how to express it in this format. So, but Jen, I really liked what you said. The custom error messages on Flow were, as a practitioner, that was my favorite. In terms of clients and what it has been a game changer for them. I'm not going to say anything that surprises anyone. The dynamic forms, the continued support for dynamic forms on more standard objects is huge. Dynamic forms, Jen, I mean, you know this better than I do, but I mean, that's one of the biggest core enhancements. That's a huge core enhancement, and it's something that clients obviously have been asking for and are thrilled with the results. So great to see that in the release.
I love that. And just think a little more. And I know that there's so many, and we're going to go live, y'all, with some of your questions in just a few seconds. Okay. But I wanted to kind of go back to that too. We know that there's amazing modules in Trailhead. I've attended some of your, meetups, Jen. I'm curious though, hitting the ground running, right? I'm a solo admin on a team. I am stretched, right? I'm taking care of my kids in the evening. I know I want to do continuous learning. I know Winter 24 is coming out. What are some top tips that you all recommend to really squeeze and budget in that learning, whether it's Trailhead, meetup, documentation? Like, where should those solo admins that are really pressed for time really be focusing their continuous learning energy right now in advance of Winter 24?
There are so many resources out there that if you're not able to read the 500 something pages of release notes, and I don't blame you if you don't have time, because who does, right? There are so many blogs out there that do highlights for you. Rakesh Gupta's Automation Champions one, Salesforce Ben. There's so many others that I can't even remember to rattle off. And my mega blog post will be coming out soon, so be on the lookout for that for you admins out there. There's also Trailhead will be also releasing little modules on the Winter 24 based on whatever thing that you're interested in, whether sales, industries, things like that. So be on the lookout for that. And we're also, for those going to Dreamforce next September. We do have, we're bringing release readiness live for developers and admins at Dreamforce. It will also be live streamed on Salesforce Plus. And I think following Dreamforce, we'll also be releasing the usual release readiness live as well sessions.
I love that you're saying claps in for those listening right now. It's super, super, super exciting. Same question for you, right, Brian? Thinking a little bit more about, we know there's a ton of information out there. I'm curious for you, what are some of those leaders out there and additional resources outside of Trailhead and the amazing resources of Salesforce? What are some of your go-tos that you recommend others, subscribe to or listen to, thinking a little bit more about, these latest feature releases?
Sure. I would say this is a little bit of I'll give you a couple takes. The first is I'm a big fan of learning by doing. So I know that one of the pre-questions that you had asked, that you had sent us, Tristan, was about, hey, if there's an admin that wants to get better at SOCL, like what are resources that they should check out to do that? I'm a big fan of I learn by doing stuff. So I think one of the things that admins that I've worked with, what I'll encourage them to do is next time they're going to run a report, instead of running the report, try getting that same report using SOCL instead of running the report. It just gets you in the habit of actually using it as opposed to just studying about it or reading about it. Because I know we're all busy, so it's hard to actually put it into practice unless you kind of force yourself to. So that's one sort of tip, not a resource, but a tip. I'd say this isn't so much new features, but in terms of kind of thought leaders to follow, a lot of the topics that we're talking about here are DevOps topics, how we work together, how we collaborate together as Salesforce people with the business, et cetera. I'd say in the DevOps space, we've talked a lot about process, but there's, as with many things, it's important to know the process. It's also important to know the tools. So 3 folks in the DevOps space that I'd recommend folks check out. Blanca Leon Carter is one. Rob Cowell, who's an evangelist for GearSet, and Andrew Davis, who's, I think, an evangelist for Copado. All 3 of them are great. And they give you kind of both sides of the equation, the process considerations and the technology considerations. So definitely check those folks out. And obviously anything that Jen Lee and her team does in terms of release readiness and release notes is must read as well.
I love that. And Janine, I'd love to bring you up on the stage. If you raise your hand, we'd love to get you live, friend. Yes, let's bring her up. Oh, here we go. Let's see if I get her.
Hello.
How are you, Janine? It's so good to have you on. What questions do you have, and how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you? It's good to hear your voice.
Oh, I'm doing what I can. Bay Area to Bay Area. Hello.
Woohoo. Yeah, long distance. Looking forward to seeing everybody in person again at Dreamforce. Larry laughing. All right. Well, so here's my question. And actually, it's interesting because I think in subsequent bits of this conversation, I think Pallavi actually addressed it. So, but one of the things that I was kind of hearing was like, the admin's going to go off and build something and definitely ask your dev this question. But I was like, yeah, but what about the BA and what about your architect? And shouldn't some other people be involved in that conversation? So Pallavi, thank you so much for kind of saying, yeah, there should be other people at the table for this. And so I think you've kind of addressed the question, but I don't know if you want to say any more about that. I mean, I don't think that any one person really acts on their own, or at least they shouldn't. Are there scenarios where like somebody is really potentially acting on their own that you've ever seen?
Yeah, I think so. Like, right, there's a lot of, as we were talking about the solo admins, right? A lot of them are out there acting on their own, and whether they want to or not is a different question, but the role that they're in, they are solely responsible for their org and doing all the changes. And a lot of times it's also because most of their organizations just look at Salesforce as just another tool, and they don't understand the power of Salesforce and the importance of it. So like, I run the DC admin group, and sometimes we have jokes about like, little do they know I could bring that entire company down if I just everybody, right? Because like a lot of times that role is also not given that much importance. they're trying their best to
Yeah.
do everything and anything in those roles as the developer, as the architect, as the BA, as the tester, as the admin, as the designer. So I think they have the most challenging roles.
Yeah.
And where they can continue to scale up and skill up is by having conversations with other community members. Brian just listed a few, and there's a few on this panel, there's a few in this audience, but just having those conversations and these feeling like you have a pseudo team outside of your organization that you can lean on.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to this idea that where admins walk around and go, I'm just the admin. I'm like, you are not just the admin. I mean, you, like you said, you can literally take your organization down. You have a lot of power. And so I think don't diminish yourself and say, I'm just the admin. I mean, I'm the admin, right? I mean, I'm the awesome admin. I really think there's a lot of power in that statement to recognize that if you're the only person supporting your Salesforce org in your organization, you're the admin, you're the architect, you're the BA, you're the designer, you're the developer. You are the Salesforce support system. So you shouldn't diminish that by just saying anything like, I'm just the admin, for sure.
I'm curious, Jen, too, and that's a really good point. I'm curious, Jen, too, because you went from being a customer to working at Salesforce. How did you, over the span of your career, how did you work to, empower yourself in your role, right? I mean, continuous learning, like, what are some things that have helped you, continue to empower yourself and others in the process?
Yeah, so I was introduced to Salesforce back in 2011. Okay, so now I'm dating myself.
No more than I am, girl.
As a technical project manager. And so we were on a project to take a business unit in a jammed packed Salesforce org and create their own org. So that's my first exposure. And then once that project went live, we use a consulting firm. So once that project went live, our in-house team was responsible for that org going forward. So I had to learn the ropes. And like Brian said, I'm one who learns best by actually doing. So I took the admin 201 class, whatever it's called right now, just to get the basics down there. And this was pre-Trailhead. So I would go and Google and find blogs out there, and I would read through the blogs and like how-to things, and I would follow and create them in my DE org. And it's really by learning, that constant learning and, being curious. Here's this new feature. Maybe my org doesn't use it now, but let me go and play around with it and see what it can do, and then bring that back to the business and say, hey, we could use this or we could use that. But it's that being constantly curious and wanting to learn and building things is how you build that knowledge.
And what advice would you have, and this is for you and anyone on this panel too, is that, I talk a lot with these, I always have a soft spot in my heart for, the solo admins, but I've also heard from a lot of people that they don't have the level of support for continuous learning from their managers, right? And I know that people can do stuff in their evenings and weekends, 100%, but how do you kind of justify and make the business case around that discovery of new tools, right? And providing value back to the business, because so often people don't want to be prepared until the issue comes up. So like, what's one piece of advice you would give to those solo admins about making the business case for structuring and time for continuous learning?
I mean, ultimately, excuse me, it benefits the company, right? The more knowledgeable you are, the better off the company is. But I'm sorry, I cut you off, Pallavi. I think.
No, go for it, Jen. I'll add after. Go for it.
No, that was all I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think from a business perspective, I'm not just going to invest in any tool out there until my team has given me a business case and shown me value of it, right? So as the individual who's coming to me to say, hey, I want to use this tool because it's going to make my life easier, or it's going to be better for the organization and so forth, I want to see the value and the POC around it. That's where I think most of the tools that are out there always have these free trials. You have sandboxes, individual sandboxes that you can spin up to test these things out and then proof out that business case of where, like, look, I was able to do this and it can elevate. That time, if you're doing that, some people would argue, like, do you do it outside of your business hours or in your business hours? If it's benefiting the company, it's part of the company work time, right? You're researching, you're progressing, and you're doing that. So from someone who has to sign those bills and pay them, I want to see the business value before I just sign anything and pay for it, right? So that would be my perspective.
I love that. I think that's such an important perspective too, because we often hear from the ICs or the managers, but we don't often hear from the business founder and owner, right, who is paying for those features and those tools. I'm curious for you, Brian, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's generally a pretty powerful argument for leadership of any organization is, like, what are our competitors doing? How are other people using Salesforce? What are the best practices? And I think there's a straight line between that question and an admin or a developer or any sales professional getting more involved with the community, because that's the best place to learn what other organizations are doing with these investments. So to Pallavi's point, that should be something that an admin can do on their work time, is get involved with the community. And the added benefit of it is, so many of these community resources are available for free. You can go to community groups, you can go to meetups and various things, and Jen's team and other, evangelist teams within Salesforce put out so many great resources. So you can do it at relatively low cost. And I think if you frame it as we're gonna figure out what other organizations are doing, that's a really good argument to make in favor of doing this.
I absolutely love that. And, we do like to end just a few minutes before the hour because I know people are in back-to-back meetings. But I was thinking to myself while you all were talking, and this latest responses were in this perfect order. And I was like, it's like you all know each other outside of this conversation or something. But I'm curious, thinking a little bit more about this topic, right? What's the one thing that you want everyone to take away from this conversation, whether they're listening live and or listening to this recording? What's the number one thing you want them to take away? And that can be admins, architects, or developers listening. What's the most important thing you want people to remember? Let's start with Jen.
I think for relationship building between admins and developers, it really comes down to having that great communication, respect, and trust for one another. And then you can just go from there as a great, highly effective running team. Just, have that as your foundation to move forward.
I love that. I'm going to go to Pallavi. One thing you want people to take away from this conversation?
Curiosity is the key to everything, and communication.
Love. Brian.
I'm going to go back to something I mentioned before, and Janine kind of mentioned it as well, is there's no hierarchy with these things, whether you're an admin, developer, architect, whatever your role is, like, get rid of the hierarchy. Everybody's got a role to play. Any of these roles are like full careers. You could do them for a really, really long time. So there's no need to move on to the next thing, whatever the next thing is, if you love what you're doing now. And if you take that mindset into working with other people, it creates a lot of magic.
I love that. And I'm going to ask y'all one last question, because I always do this to people and I don't tell them beforehand. I want to know, y'all, because I know a certain event is coming up, which we will not name for Jen's sake. Although it has been brought up multiple times in this conversation, I will say we are super, 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 super excited about it. But I know that there's a lot of labor that goes into in advance. And I'm curious for you, Jen, what's the number one song that you're listening to right now to motivate you for your workday? Gotcha. It's not a gotcha question, but it's just a question.
Oh my goodness. So I don't remember the name of the actual song, but it's a song by Pink where it's about a rock star.
Do you know any bars?
I forget the name.
I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Oh, I'm not going to sing that. No one needs to hear that.
Maybe
she plays that song as her closing act.
I recently saw her at Fenway. She plays that song as a closing act, and she does acrobatics while she's singing the song.
So what?
That's badass.
Facts. And you just saw her, Pallavi, right?
I did. I think it's called So What.
Ah,
Yes.
yeah. You're right. So what?
Yes.
I'm a rock star. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the same show, Jen, in DC. So I'm a huge Pink fan. So that's awesome.
Are you also listening to a Pink song right now to motivate you through the work?
Yeah. It's gonna sound really funny because I'm constantly like surprised by the platform I'm given through Salesforce to speak and stuff. So the I Made It song.
Yes. Well, you do also lift up and help a lot of others too. So it's not like you're not getting this platform for nothing, right? And I'm curious too, and I appreciate that. Brian, last question for you. Number one song you're listening to right now to motivate you through your workday?
I am listening to a song by Aretha Franklin called Since You've Been Gone. I somehow just heard about it in this last week, and I've been listening to it all the time.
I love that. I have a playlist. I'm adding all of these to it right now. This is awesome. My one would be to check out Leon. If you all don't know her, Leon, she has a new album coming out soon, and her song is called Pretty Boy, but it's got a beautiful background with synth, and I just love her. But we are 5 minutes before the hour, so I want to say, y'all, if you're listening to this recording or live, I want to thank everyone for the pre-submitted questions. Janine, I want to thank you for coming up. I cannot wait to see you at the upcoming big event, which we will not name for Jen's sake. And Jen, thank you so much for taking some time out of your calendar before this big event to come share knowledge, and cannot wait to see you up on stage. And Brian, just so appreciative of you. And Pallavi, I know that there's so much going on. And so really want to thank you also for inspiring those admins out there, and also the architects, developers, BAs, and everyone. The one thing I'm taking away from this conversation is, continuing to work towards removing hierarchies in organizations as much as possible, so everyone comes to the table and everyone is heard. I want to thank each of you so much. It's been such a joy, and stay tuned, y'all, because we will be having another one of these series in a month, and you are not going to want to miss it. And we're naming the names soon. Thank you all so much, and congratulations to everyone who's made it to Wednesday. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And don't worry. Yeah.
Just a real quick shameless plug for Jen.
Yes.
She is working really hard on this admin keynote. And so even those of you who can't make it to Dreamforce, it'll be on Salesforce Plus.
Correct.
I hope you guys get to watch it because she's putting together some really cool demos from her team with her team. And it's going to be really rocking and awesome. And then I don't think Brian or our sessions will be live, but there's quite a few other amazing sessions that will be there that will be live. So I really hope you guys get to watch some of the amazing stuff that everyone's working hard on.
Correct. Also, come to Boba Blazers, y'all. If you're coming live, come to Boba Blazers. It's a great place to meet everyone together. And there's a good cause they're supporting for the Maui fires. So Boba Blazers, you're definitely going to see me there. And stay tuned on Salesforce Plus. With that said, everyone, have a fabulous rest of your work week, and we'll see you online next time. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.